In the Varieties of Religious Experience, a study in human nature by William James, we continue lectures 11, 12, and 13, Saintliness. Through all the different forms of communion and all the diversity of the means which help to produce this state, whether it be reached by a jubilee, by a general confession, by a solitary prayer and effusion, whatever in short be the place and the occasion, it is easy to recognize that it is fundamentally one state in spirit and in fruits. Penetrate a little beneath the diversity of circumstances, and it becomes evident that in Christians of different epochs, it is always one and the same modification by which they are affected. There is veritably a single fundamental and identical spirit of piety and charity common to those who have received grace, and an inner state which before all things is one of love and humility, of infinite confidence in God, and of severity for oneself, accompanied with tenderness for others. The fruits in peculiar to this condition of the soul have the same Savior in all, under the distant suns and in different surroundings, and in Saint Teresa of Avila, just as in any Moravian brother of Herrnhut. Saint Beuve, Port Royal, Volume 1, page 99 and 106, abridged, is where the quote that we start from is. And we find that, yeah, there are differences between the faith groups, but for the most part, what we find there is universal to each of the groups, right? Saint Beuve has here only the more eminent circumstances of regeneration in mind, and these are the courses, the instructive ones for us also to consider. These devotees have often laid their course so differently from other men that, judging them by worldly law, we might be tempted to call them monstrous aberrations from the path of nature. I begin therefore by asking a general psychological question as to what the inner conditions are which may make one human character differ so extremely from another. I reply at once that where the character as something distinguished from the intellect is concerned, the causes of human diversity lie chiefly in our differing susceptibilities of emotional excitement, and in the different impulses and ambitions which these bring in their train. Let me make this more clear. Speaking generally, our moral and practical attitude at any given time is always a resultant of two sets of forces within us, impulses pushing us one way and obstructions and inhibitions holding us back. Yes, yes, say the impulses. No, no, say the inhibitions. Few people have not expressly reflected on the matter, realized how constantly this factor of inhibition is upon us, and how it contains and molds us by its restrictive pressure, almost as if we were fluids pent within the cavity of a jar. The influence is so incessant that it becomes subconscious. All of you, for example, sit here with a certain constraint at this moment, and entirely without express consciousness of the fact because of the influence of the occasion. If left alone in the room, each of you would probably involuntarily rearrange himself and make his attitude more free and easy. But properties and their inhibitions snap like cobwebs if any great emotional excitement supervenes. I have seen a dandy appear in the street with his face covered with shaving lather because a house across the way was on fire, and a woman will run among strangers in her nightgown if it be a question of saving her baby's life or her own. Take a self-indulgent woman's life in general. She will yield to every inhibition set by her disagreeable sensations, lie late in bed, live upon tea or bromides, and keep indoors from the cold. Every difficulty finds her obedient to its no, but make a mother of her, and what have you, possessed by maternal excitement, she now confronts wakefulness, weariness, and toil, without an instant of hesitation or a word of complaint, The inhibitive power of pain over her is extinguished wherever the baby's interests are at stake. The inconveniences which this creature occasions have become, as James Hinton says, the glowing heart of a great joy, and indeed are now the very conditions whereby the joy becomes most deep. This is an example of what you have already heard of as the expulsive power of a higher affection. But be the affection high or low, it makes no difference, so long as the excitement it brings be strong enough. In one of Henry Drummond's discourses, he tells of an inundation in India where an eminence with a bungalow upon it remained unsubmerged and became the refuge of a number of wild animals and reptiles in addition to the human beings who were there. At a certain moment, a royal Bengal tiger appeared swimming towards it, reached it, and lay panting like a dog upon the ground in the midst of the people, still possessed by such an agony of terror that one of the Englishmen could calmly step up with a rifle and blow out its brains. The tiger's habitual ferocity was temporarily quelled by the emotion of fear, which became sovereign and formed a new center for his character. Sometimes no emotional state is sovereign, but many contrary ones are mixed together. In that case, one hears both yeses and nos, and the will is called on then to solve the conflict. Take a soldier, for example, with his dread of cowardice impelling him to advance, his fears impelling him to run, and his propensities to imitation pushing him towards various courses. If his comrades offer various examples, his person becomes the seat of a mass of interferences, and he may for a time supply waver, because no one emotion prevails. There is a pitch of intensity, though, which, if any emotion reach it, enthrones that one as alone effective and sweeps its antagonists and all their inhibitions away. The fury of his comrades' charge, once entered on, will give this pitch of courage to the soldier. The panic of their rout will give this pitch of fear. In these sovereign excitements, things ordinarily impossible grow natural because the inhibitions are annulled. Their no not only is not heard, it does not exist. Obstacles are then like tissue paper hoops to the circus rider. No impediment. The flood is higher than the dam they make. Las si betaln gehen wen, si hungrig sind, cries the grenadier, frantic over his emperor's capture, when his wife and babies are suggested, and men pent into a burning theater have been known to cut their way through the crowd with knives. Love would not be loved, says Orget, unless it could carry one to crime. And so one may say that no passion would be a veritable passion unless it could carry one to crime. Well, depends on what's actual crime and what's just labeled, right? Siegel, Psychology des Sects, page 136. In other words, great passions annul the ordinary inhibitions set by conscience. And, conversely, of all the criminal human beings, the false, cowardly, sensual, or cruel persons who actually live there, there is perhaps not one whose criminal impulse may not be at some moment overpowered by the presence of some other emotion, to which his character is also potentially liable, provided that other emotion be only made intense enough. Fear is usually the most available emotion for this result in this particular class of persons. That's why we need to bring back the, death penalty, right? And, corporal punishment. I mean, formal corporal punishment. The other doesn't work. Fear is liable. Fear is usually the most... It stands for conscious, and may here be classed appropriately as a higher affection. If we are soon to die, or if we believe a day of judgment to be near at hand, how quickly do we put our moral house in order? We do not see how sin can evermore exert temptation over us. Old-fashioned hellfire Christianity well knew how to extract from fear, its full equivalent in the way of fruits for repentance, and its full conversion value. One mode of excitability is exceedingly important in the composition of the energetic character from its peculiarly destructive power over inhibitions. I mean, what in its lower form is mere irascibility, susceptibility to wrath, the fighting temper, and what in subtler ways manifests itself as impatience, grimness, earnestness, severity of character. Earnestness means willingness to live with energy, though energy bring pain. The pain may be pain to other people or pain to oneself. It makes no little difference. It makes little difference, for when the strenuous mood is on one, the aim is to break something, no matter whose or what. Nothing annihilates an inhibition as irresistibly as anger does. For as Moltke says of war, destruction pure and simple is its essence. This is what makes it so invaluable, an ally of every other passion. The sweetest delights are trampled on with the ferocious pleasure the moment they offer themselves as checks to a cause by which our higher indignations are elicited. It costs then nothing to drop friendships, to renounce long-rooted privileges and possessions, to break with social ties. Rather do we take stern joy in the astringency and desolation, and what is called weakness of character seems in most cases to consist in the inaptitude for the sacrificial moods of which one's own inferior self and its pet softnesses must often be the targets and victims. For example, Benjamin Constant was often marveled at as an extraordinary instance of superior intelligence with inferior character. He writes, Journal Paris, 1895, page 56, I am tossed and dragged about by my miserable weakness. Never was anything so ridiculous as my indecision. Now marriage, now solitude, now Germany, now France, hesitation upon hesitation, and all because at bottom I am unable to give up anything. He can't get mad at any of his alternatives, and the career of man beset by such an all-around amiability is hopelessness. So far, I have spoken of temporary alterations produced by shifting excitements in the same person, but the relatively fixed differences of character in different persons are explained in a precisely similar way. In a man with a liability to a special sort of emotion, whole ranges of inhibition habitually vanish, which in other men remain effective, and other sorts of inhibition take their place. When a person has an inborn genius for certain emotions, his life differs strangely from that of ordinary people, for none of their usual deterrents check him. Your mere aspirant to a type of character, on the contrary, only shows when your natural lover, fighter, or reformer, with whom the passion is a gift of nature, comes along, the hopeless inferiority of voluntary to instinctive action. He has deliberately to overcome his inhibitions. The genius with the inborn passion seems not to feel them at all. He is free of all that inner friction and nervous waste. To a Fox, Garibaldi, a General Booth, a John Brown, a Louis Michel, a Bradlaugh, the obstacles omnipotent over those around them are as if non-existent. Could the rest of us so disregard them? There might be many such heroes, for many have the wish to live for similar ideals, and only the adequate degree of inhibition quenching fury is lacking. The great thing which the higher excitabilities give is courage, and the addition or subtraction of a certain amount of this quality makes a different man a different life. Various excitements let the courage loose. Trustful hope will do it. Inspiring example will do it. Love will do it. Wrath will do it. In some people, it is natively so high that the mere touch of danger does it, though danger is for most men the greater inhibitor of action. Love of adventure becomes in such persons a ruling passion. I believe, says General Skobelev, that my bravery is simply the passion and at the same time the contempt of danger. The risk of life fills me with an exaggerated rapture. The fewer there are to share it, the more I like it. The participation of my body in the event is required to furnish me an adequate excitement. Everything intellectual appears to me to be reflex, but a meeting of man to man, a duel, a danger, into what I can throw myself. Head foremost, attracts me, moves me, intoxicates me. I am crazy for it. I love it. I adore it. I run after danger as one runs after women. I wish it would never stop. Were it always the same, it would always bring me new pleasure. When I throw myself into an adventure in which I hope to find it, my heart palpitates with the uncertainty. I could wish at once to have it here, and yet to delay. A sort of painful and delicious shiver shakes me. My entire nature runs to meet peril with an impetus that my mind would in vain try to resist, says Juliet Adam, the General Skobelev, Vale Review, 1886, abridged. Skobelev seems to have been a cruel egotist, but the disinterested Garibaldi, if one may judge by his memory, lived in an unflagging emotion of similar danger-seeking excitement. Well, some need the particular degree of emotion, but they the relaxation and stuff with it, and then, the other comes in. To pick one up, you could say. The difference between willing and merely wishing, between having ideals that are creative and ideals that are but pinings and regrets, thus depends solely either on the amount of steam pressure chronically driving the character in the ideal direction, or on the account of ideal excitement and transiently acquired, given a certain amount of love, indignation, generosity, magnanimity, admiration, loyalty, or enthusiasm of self-surrender. The result is always the same, that the whole raft of cowardly obstructions, which in tame persons and dull moods are sovereign impediments to action, sinks away at once. Our conventionality, our shyness, laziness, and stinginess, our demands for precedent and permission, for guarantee and surety, our small suspicions, timidities, despairs, where are they now? Seeing the case on page 70 above, where the writer describes his experiences of communion with the divine as consisting merely in the temporary obliteration of conventionalities which usually cover my life. That last sentence is a quote. Severed like cobwebs, broken like bubbles in the sun. Wo sind die Sorgen und Nacht, die Knack gestern Wollt. Erschlafen, ich scham mich des im Morgenrot. I think that's how you pronounce it. That's supposed to be, that's German, right? The flood we are borne on rolls them so lightly under their very current. The flood we are borne on rolls them so lightly under that their very contact is unfelt. Set free of them, we float and soar and sing. The aurora openness and uplift gives to all creative ideal levels a bright and caroling quality, which is nowhere more marked than where the controlling emotion is religious. The true monk, writes an Italian mystic, takes nothing with him but his lyre. Well, doesn't the Bible say that Satan's the chief musician and stuff like this? And, we may now turn from these psychological generalities to those fruits of the religious state, which form the special subject of our present lecture. The man who lives in his religious center of personal energy and is actuated by spiritual enthusiasms differs from his previous carnal self in perfectly definite ways. The new ardor which burns in his breast consumes in its glow the lower nose which formerly beset him, and keeps him immune against the infection from the entire groveling portion of his nature. Magnanimities, once impossible, are now easy. Paltry conventionalities and mean incentives, once tyrannical, hold no sway. The stone wall inside of him has fallen. The hardness in his heart has broken down. The rest of us can, I think, imagine this by recalling our state of feeling in those temporary melting moods into which either the trials of real life or the theater or a novel sometimes throw us, especially if we weep, for it is then as if our tears broke through an inveterate inner dam and let all sorts of ancient vacancies and moral stagnancies drain away, leaving us now washed and soft of heart and open to every nobler leading. With most of us, the customary hardness quickly returns, but not so with saintly persons. Many saints, even as energetic ones as Teresa and many saints, even as energetic ones as Teresa and Loyola, have possessed what the Church traditionally reveres as a special grace, the so-called gift of tears. In these persons, the melting mood seems to have held almost uninterrupted control, and as it is with tears and melting moods, it is so with other exalted affections. Their reign may come by gradual growth or by a crisis, but in either case, it may have come to stay. At the end of the last lectures, we saw this permanence to be true of the general paramountcy of the higher insight, even though in the ebbs of emotional excitement, meaner motives may temporarily prevail and backsliding might occur, but that lower temptations may remain completely annulled, apart from transient emotion, and as if by alteration of the man's habitual nature, is also proved by documentary evidence in certain cases. Before embarking on the general natural history of the regenerate character, let me convince you of this curious fact by one or two examples. The most numerous are those of reformed drunkards. You recollect the case of Mr. Hadley in The Last Adventure. The Jerry McAuley Walter Street Mission abounds in similar instances. Above page 201, the only radical remedy that I know for dipsomania is religiomania, is a saying I've heard quoted from some medical man. You also remember the graduate of Oxford converted at 3 in the afternoon and getting drunk in the hayfield the next day, but after that permanently cured of his appetite. From that hour, drink has had no terrors for me. I never touch it, never want it. The same thing occurred with my pipe. The desire for it went at once, and has never returned. So, with every known sin, the deliverance in each case being permanent and complete. I've had no temptation since conversion. I don't see how that's not an overstatement, but perhaps those things have been replaced in where they were put in life. Here is an analogous case from Starbuck's manuscript collection. I went into an old Adelphi theater where there was a holiness meeting, and I began saying, "Lord, Lord, I must have this blessing." Then, what was to me an audible voice said, "Are you willing to give up everything to the Lord?" And question after question kept coming, to all of which I said, yes, Lord, until this came, "Why do you not accept it now?" I said, "I do, Lord." I felt no particular joy, only a trust. Just then, the meeting closed, and as I went out on the street, I met a gentleman smoking a fine cigar, and a cloud of smoke came into my face, and I took a long, deep breath of it, and praised the Lord. All my appetite for it was gone. And as I walked along the street, passing saloons where the fumes of liquor came out, I found that all my taste and longing for that accursed stuff was gone. Glory to God! But for 10 or 11 long years after that, I was in the wilderness. With its ups and downs, my appetite for liquor never came back. And one finds that you have people that Um, there's people that, even whole classes of drug addicts, have a higher than average salary, but they don't have the bounty of life because they're spending the bounty of life on the drug. And yes, alcohol's a drug, and oh, it's a plant, it's not, you know, I guess you have to do a lot of drugs to fall for that. It's not a drug, it's a plant. It's not a drug, it's just booze, you know. Yeah. But yeah, sometimes, you know, that extra money you have from giving up your vice, you know, this is quite the bounty, right? The classic case of Colonel Gardiner is that of a man cured of sexual temptation in a single hour. To Mr. Spears, the Colonel said, "I was effectually cured of all inclination to that sin. I was so strongly addicted to that, I thought nothing but shooting me through the head could have cured me of it, and all desire and inclination to do it was removed as entirely as if I had been a sucking child. Nor did the temptation return to this day." Mr. Webster's words on the same subject are these: "One thing I have heard the Colonel frequently say, that he was much addicted to impurity before his acquaintance with religion, but that so soon as he was enlightened from above, he felt the power of the Holy Ghost changing his nature so wonderfully that his sanctification in this respect seemed more remarkable than in any other." Now, the one thing to any other... I guess this indicate where the quote starts, but Doddridge's Life of Colonel James Gardiner, London Religious Tract Society, page 23 to 32. Such rapid abolition of ancient impulses and propensities reminds us so strongly of what has been observed as the result of hypnotic suggestion that it is difficult not to believe that subliminal influences play the decisive part in these abrupt changes of heart, just as they do in hypnotism. Here, for example, is a case from Starbuck's book in which a sensory automatism brought about quickly what prayers and resolves had been unable to effect. The subject is a woman, she writes. Now, I don't know why I keep saying that word. I know how to say it. When I was about 40, I tried to quit smoking, but the desire was on me and had me in its power. I cried and prayed and promised God to quit, but could not. I had smoked for 15 years, while there's a nutritional side to most addictions. Caffeine, alcohol, and tobacco in particular. I had smoked for 15 years. When I was 53, as I sat by the fire one day smoking, a voice came to me. I did not hear it with my ears, but more as a dream or sort of double think. It said, "Louisa, lay down smoking." At once I replied, "Will you take the desire away?" But it only kept saying, "Louisa, lay down smoking." Then I got up, laid my pipe on the mantel shelf, and never smoked again or had any desire to. The desire was gone, as though I had never known it or touched tobacco. The sight of others smoking and the smell of smoke never gave me the least wish to touch again. The Psychology of Religion, page 142. Suggestive therapeutics abound in records of cure after a few sittings of inveterate bad habits with which the patient, left to ordinary moral and physical influences, had struggled in vain. Both drunkenness and sexual vice have been cured in this way, action through the subliminal seeming thus in many individuals to have the prerogative of inducing relatively stable change. If the grace of God miraculously operates, it probably operates through the subliminal door then. But just how anything operates in this region is still unexplained, and we shall do well now to say goodbye to the process of transformation altogether, leaving it, if you like, a good deal of psychological or theological mystery, and to turn our attention to the fruits of the religious condition, no matter in what way they may have been produced. Professor Starbuck expresses the radical destruction of old influences physiologically as a cutting off of the connection between the higher and lower cerebral centers. This condition, he says, in which the association centers connected with the spiritual life are cut off from the lower, is often reflected in the way correspondents describe their experiences. For example, temptations from without still assail me, but there is nothing within to respond to them. The ego here is wholly identified with the higher centers, those whose quality of feeling is that of withinness. Another of the respondents says, since then, although Satan tempts me, there is, as it were, a wall of brass around me, so that his darts cannot touch me. Unquestionably, functional exclusions of this sort must occur in the cerebral organ. But on the side accessible to introspection, their causal condition is nothing but the degree of spiritual excitement getting at last so high and strong as to be sovereign, and it must be frequently confessed that we do not know just why or how such sovereignty comes about in one person and not in another. We can only give our imagination a certain delusive help by mechanical analogies. If we should conceive, for example, that the human mind, with its different possibilities of equilibrium, might be like a many-sided solid with different surfaces on which it could lie flat, we might liken mental revolutions to the spatial revolutions of such body, as it is pried up, say, by a lever, from a position in which it lies on surface A, for instance. It will linger for a time, unstably halfway up, and if the lever cease to urge it, it will tumble back or relapse under the continual pull of gravity. But if at last it rotate far enough for its center of gravity to pass beyond surface A altogether, the body will fall over on surface B, say, and abide there permanently. The pulls of gravity towards A have vanished and may now be disregarded. The polyhedron has become immune against farther attraction from their direction. In this figure of speech, the lever may correspond to the emotional influences, making for a new life, and the initial pull of gravity to the ancient drawbacks and inhibitions, so long as the emotional influence fails to reach a certain pitch of efficacy. The changes it produces are unstable, and the man relapses into his original attitude. But when a certain intensity is attained by the new emotion, a critical point is passed, and there then ensues a irreversible revolution equivalent to the production of a new nature. The collective name for the ripe fruits of religion in a character is saintliness. William James uses the word in spite of a certain flavor of sanctimoniousness. Sanctimoniousness, which sometimes clings to it because no other word suggests as well the exact combination of affections which the text goes on to describe. The saintly character is the character for which spiritual emotions are the habitual center of the personal energy, and there is a certain composite photograph of universal saintliness, the same in all religions, of which the features can be easily traced. It will be found, says Dr. W.R. Ing in his lectures on Christian mysticism in London, 1899, page 326, that men of preeminent saintliness agree very closely in what they tell us. They tell us that they have arrived at an unshakable conviction, not based on inference, but on immediate experience, that God is a spirit with whom the human spirit can hold intercourse. That in, communication. That in him meet all day, all that they can imagine of goodness and truth and beauty, and that they can see his footprints everywhere in nature and feel his presence within them as the very life of their life, so that in proportion as they come to themselves, they come to him. They tell us what separates us from him and from happiness is, first, self-seeking in all its forms, and secondly, sensuality in all its forms, that these are the ways of darkness and death, which hide us from the face of God, while the path of the just is like a shining light, which shineth more and more into the perfect day. And the features that can be traced, they are these. 1, a feeling of being in a wider life than that of this world's selfish little interest, and a conviction not merely intellectual, but as it were sensible of the existence of an ideal power. In a Christian saintliness, this power is often personified as God, but the abstract moral ideals civic or patriotic utopias, our inner visions of holiness or right, may also be felt as the true lords and enlargers of our life in ways in which I described in the lecture on the reality of the unseen. And the enthusiasm of humanity may lead to a life which coalesces in many respects with that of Christian saintliness. Take the following rules proposed to members of the Union pour l'Action Morale in the Bulletin de l'Union, April 1st through 15th of 1894. See also Revenu Bleu, August 13, 1892. We would make known in our own persons the usefulness of rule, of discipline, of resignation, of renunciation. We would teach the necessary perpetuity of suffering and explain the creative part of which it plays. We would wage war upon false optimism, on the base hope of happiness coming to us ready-made, on the notion of a salvation by knowledge alone or by material civilization alone. Vain symbol as this is of civilization, precarious external arrangement, ill-fitted to replace the intimate union and consent of souls. We would wage war also on bad morals, whether in public or in private life, on luxury, fastidiousness, and over-refinement, on all that tends to increase the painful, immoral, and antisocial manipulation of our wants, on all that excites envy and dislike in the soul of the common people and confirms the notion that the chief end of life is freedom to enjoy. We would preach by our example the respect of superiors and equals, the respect of all men, affectionate simplicity in our relations with inferiors and insignificant persons, indulgence where our own claims are only concerned, but firmness in our demands where they relate to duties towards others or towards the public. For the common people are what we help them to become. Their vices are our vices, glazed upon, envied, imitated, and if they come back with all their weight upon us, it is but just. And of course, we should probably regard the fact of our influences. Oh, we don't do the deed, or we're not the one not doing this. Well, you're responsible. You're encouraging and discouraging. A sense of the friendly continuity of the ideal power with our own life and a willing self-surrender to its control. An immense elation and freedom as the outlines of the confining selfhood melt down. A shifting of the emotional center towards loving and harmonious affections, towards yes, yes, and away from no. Where the claims of the non-ego are concerned, these fundamental inner conditions have characteristic practical consequences as follows. A. Asceticism, the self-surrender, may become so passionate as to turn into self-immolation, and may then so overrule the ordinary inhibitions of the flesh that the saint finds positive pleasure in sacrifice and asceticism, measuring and explaining and expressing as they do to the degree of his loyalty to the higher power. Strength of soul. The sense of enlargement of life may be so uplifting that personal motives and inhibitions, commonly omnipotent, becomes too insignificant for notice, and new reaches of patience and fortitude open out. Fears and anxieties go, and blissful equanimity takes place. Come heaven, come hell, it makes no difference now. And we forbid ourselves from seeking after popularity, all ambitions to appear important. Okay.